Hello, everyone. This is Stella, also known as Saint Bella, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Here, I want to show you all my approach to upcycling and a bit inside of my mind in the ways of crafting. And our first video of many here on this channel is going to be this comforter that I thrifted last year, which is absolutely gorgeous. And I'm glad I saved it for the perfect occasion because it is the month of love and also it is also Black History Month, and we're going to be making a short capelet with hopefully a hood and ruffles. So when it comes to the nature of upcycling, you never know exactly what the garment will yield when you're working with pre-existing materials. So hopefully we can do a perfect tango, or at least a well enough tango, and we get where I'm looking for. Let's go. All right, so we're down here on the floor because this is where I do a lot of my cutting. First step is going to be detaching the ruffles. As you can see, we have quite a big piece of fabric to work with, but also I want to try to keep as much of the integrity of the design as possible. And if you can see here, I do have quite a bit of ruffles going around the entirety of the blanket except for one edge, and I want to keep it. So first up is going to be detaching some ruffles. Now that we've removed our ruffles, now it's time to get into the tricky part, which is also the fun part. When I work, I most times am not using a pattern when I'm creating quilt coats, or if you've ever seen any of the quilt jackets I've made before. A lot of times what I do is I lay out my material and I snap a pic and then I draw directly onto my image, and I try to plot out exactly where I want my pattern pieces to go. In this design, I wanted to keep the detailing on the back as the center back. So we're going to have to play around with it a bit because the piece is large and I am not exactly sure how I would be able to fit it all on there. This is where it gets a little bit of, I guess, rocky waters, but I would suggest do not do as I do unless you feel completely confident and potentially ruining something that you don't want to mess up, or if you're willing to allow the garment to do what it wants and then you just kind of work around it, proceed with caution. So since I know that the back of the coat has a center design that I'm looking to keep, I'm going to start with my markings there first. And I'm just going to start by marking one side of what the coat shape is going to be, and then I'll just fold the piece in half directly and then cut it again. Only because I do want to try and keep this centered without a pattern. And again, this is not ideal for if you're kind of new, but if you're, again, willing to experiment, by all means, just jump into it. But just think about shapes and think about measurements. So the measurements I took are going to be across my back. As far as the design goes, the main measurement to keep is the length. So I want to keep from the top of my neck to about right below my natural waistline, and then we're gonna go from there. You're also going to want to take a measurement across the width of your back, but again, since I'm keeping the design on the back, if you are working with something that doesn't have anything decorative to the degree in which I did, you also want to take your back measurement going from left to right. And since the coat has a bit of a flare towards the hips, I'm going to give myself a little bit of room when it comes to the waist. So that way it's not exactly fitted, but it'll get wider as it gets down to like around my high hip. now that we have those measurements taken, we are going to work with our curved edge, or if you have anything that you can use to kind of make a rounded edge for your neck, I suggest for you to grab that. And we're going to start by marking out the neck scoop first, which is, again, I'm just working on the half because I do have the design on the back. So I have run into like the first kind of pit stop, which is, although I want my cape coat to be short, I cannot cut into the design at 18 inches, which is the measurement that I took for myself, because it would literally chop off about 10 inches of the pattern on the back, which I do not want. So this is what happens sometimes when you're upcycling and you don't want to disturb certain aspects of the pre-existing piece. You just pivot. So instead of it being 18 inches and more of a crop, it's going to fall a little bit longer than I initially wanted, which is not really a problem to me. I'm pretty flexible when it comes to upcycling, so we're just going to work with that. And although it is a bit longer than I originally wanted, that is totally okay. We're just going to keep pushing forward. I'm going to make this a little bit simpler on myself. Instead of trying to work with it flat like that, we're going to fold the design directly in half, and then I'm going to do one set of drawings, and then we're going to do one cut. So that way I don't have to worry about if I'm going to make a potential mistake. I don't know. A lot of the times when I'm doing upcycling in this particular manner, which is my usual way of approaching things, I really am going with the flow of how the garment is presenting its details to me as I'm working with it. So we're going to fold this directly in half, and then we're going to do our markings. All right, now we have our piece folded in half, and I'm going to start doing my markings as far as where I'm going to cut. Again, the goal is to keep this back center piece, and I don't know if it's going to actually yield me much else if it's too big, but again, I'm okay with experimenting with this. You will need some kind of curve ruler, French curve. This one's called a styling design ruler from Drake. And you'll need some kind of marking chalk or regular chalk or a Sharpie. But if you do Sharpie in a fabric that is similar in color to the marker, that's okay. But just don't use black unless you're working on something that's of a darker, or you're going to cut that line because it will be visible when you sew. So we're going to mark my neck first. Now I'm going to take a measurement for my shoulder cap, which is just going to be around 5 inches. I'll make it about 5 3/4, so that way I have seam allowance. And the thing, when you're doing a shoulder, you want to give it a curve, not a curve, but an angle, so that way it sits flat on your shoulder versus it hovering. And now we're going to do our armhole, which, again, I don't take a lot of measurements. I'm very much a, we're just going to see if this works kind of person. But since I do want it to have a little bit of a flare shape, what I am going to do is that I'm going to angle my ruler so that it does kick out a bit, so that way it can then lead to me having a capelet. Now we're getting to a section where we're going to potentially run into this other design, which I don't want to do. So what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to stop it short. Since it is 28 for this center design, I'm going to let it end roughly about 1.5 inches below that, so that way I can then blend my curve. So we're going to move over here. I would probably suggest starting from this edge and then curving it up. And then essentially now we have this shape, and we're going to go ahead and cut it out. I'm a little bit chaotic when it comes to crafting, so you know, if that's also your jam, then you understand. But if you need something a little bit more structured, I totally understand if this doesn't work for you per se. But just know that when it comes to creating anything, you can follow your own way of doing things. Now we have our rotary cutter, which is my cutting tool of choice. But if you're going to use a rotary cutter, you need a cutting mat, which is what I have been working on this whole time. Just an FYI, or you can use scissors. I don't use scissors that much day to day in my personal practice, and then also at work we mainly use rotary cutters because they're faster and you can get a cleaner cut, but have to have a cutting mat. You don't want to ruin any surface that you're cutting on with the blade or ruin your blade. If you're not familiar with what the rotary cutter is, it's essentially just a giant, like, think of it as a pizza cutter for fabric. Same exact mechanism. So also know that you can also cut yourself if you're not safe using these, which I have done. And I split my ring finger right in half and was out of sewing for like a month. But you know, I know better now. I was traumatized for a while, but yeah. So now we have our back piece, which is essentially taking shape. I'm going to unpin it and then lay it flat so that way we can see exactly what we are working with. So time for the reveal of that, and that is our first piece. And now with this being cut out, I am now going to use this to base the rest of my cuts on. So I'll be able to get my armhole for my sleeves out of this, and then I'll be able to also mock up my front pieces from this essential shape as well, and I'll show you how to do that. So I have my back piece, and what I did is that I found a spot in which I want to use the design of again, which has this particular scalloping here, and it has the same on that side. But what I'm going to do is that I'm going to open it flat because I don't want to cut it at the same time in case that the two designs like this on both pieces aren't aligned. So we're just going to go ahead and open this up flat. That way we can better assess what we are going to be cutting on both layers. We'll just isolate it piece by piece. So using this, making sure I have it lined up the best I can. I'll throw a few pins in there too, just to make sure that I can say that these are even. I'm then going to try and fit this design in there. So if this is going to then be my front edge of the front, I'm going to flip this so that way this will then act as the opening on the cape. I'm just looking to see exactly where it'll fall. So let's see. What I want to do is to make sure that it's even, is that I'm just going to make sure that this is the same distance on the edge. And then we're going to weight it down because I think that's pretty good. And then I'm going to cut out this first front piece. We're going to grab our rotary cutter again and we're just going to cut. And this is our first front. And I left this extra space because I potentially might want to face the front, just so that way I don't just have to see the white. If it does fall open, it'll have at least that pop of red as well. So now we're going to do the same thing on the second piece of the front. What I'm going to do is that I'm also just going to pen in certain areas, so that way I can make sure that it is lining up and as even as possible when I cut it. So I'm just taking my raw edges and I'm just throwing a few pins in them. And I'm going to now weight it down again. And then we're going to go ahead and cut. And now we have two front pieces. Now that we have our front and our back pieces, this is what we are left with. A design on both edges. And now we have to achieve our sleeves. And the way that we're going to try and do that is that I'm going to lay out my front or back piece just that has my armhole for the sleeve, and I'm going to see exactly what can be accommodated with the remaining fabric. Actually matching up the design again to see exactly what I can do. So the way I'm about to do this is going to be very strange and potentially may not work. However, I am a fixer, so if it doesn't, then I have a idea of how I can remedy it. So I lined up the thicker trimming on this as best as I could, and I'm going to use the front piece, this is armhole, to essentially get the shape that I need to cut this out. And I'm cutting it on the fold, and I'm going to keep in mind that it has a cut here, so the furthest I can take the sleeve is about there. So I'm going to first mark out the line that prohibits me from going any further, and then we're going to do the armhole. Now we're left with essentially that shape, which works for me. So now we're going to take our front piece again, and now I'm going to use this curve here in the top point of the sleeve, which is now this, and I'm going to place the curve within this. Then I'm going to follow and merge this edge here. Now with that marking, I'm going to cut that out now. I had to take a moment to sit and think. I'm like, did I do something wrong? So the way your sleeve typically will look is not 100% like this. So when you extend your arm out, this will essentially be your shoulder cap towards your wrist. That's your armhole, which will fit into this here. I think I've accidentally created a shape that will be cool. Not exactly what I was going for, but similar. Essentially, it'll be have a little bit of a point. Now we're going to take this piece and we're just going to lay it flat. We have our first sleeve piece that we're going to use as our outline for the second. And doing like I've been doing this whole time, and we're going to so we've reached an issue of, is this all going to fit within each other? So as you can see, this has a cut that is slightly different than what we have on the first sleeve. So I could either pull this up and it won't be as drastic, or we'll cut it to the best of our ability, and then we're going to just make them match. And it seems like everything fits for the most part. We are just going to have to go back and adjust right there because it does not 100% lay within that flat, but that's okay. That's something small and minute. And I'm going to be working around it, so we're going to go ahead and cut out that second sleeve piece now. We're ready to start pinning and constructing. So we're going to take our back piece and we're going to attach them at the shoulders on both sides with our fronts. Okay, so this is the first try on. This is just it with the sleeves sewn together. I haven't serged them or anything because I wanted to check the fit. So as you can see, since I just mimicked the same pieces front and back, I have to go back and then I'm going to have to create a bigger scoop for my neck. So that way it's not suffocating me. And then these pieces will just be folded inwards. So it's self-face. I went ahead and cut the scoop, which is a lot more gradual. So now what I want to do is that once I get to that point, I'm going to fold this in so that way that is just the edge of the cape. But so far, so good. So I'm going to serge the shoulders and then I'm going to attach the sleeves. And then I'll be back. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to attach the sleeve to the armhole while the garment is flat. Because I learned while at work that just makes the process a lot easier, and then you'll just go back and close one full seam versus closing your side seam underneath the armhole and then sewing the armhole in. You would just do it while it's flat, and then you just go zoop in one sweep, and then you're done with the side. Okay, so I know it might look a little strange right now, but I have the sleeves on and it's has the cape shape. But now that I have on the sleeves, it's time to close the sides. One thing I do want to say, like when it comes to doing upcycling and like when you're sewing in general, sometimes things are going to look a little weird before you get to the end, and that is okay. Just keep progressing forward. Like right now, it might not look like much to some people, but like I can see the vision of this, and I'm excited because the main thing was I really wanted it just to have like a cape shape and to keep the I keep doing that on the back, but to keep the embroidery on the back centered. And I think it's turning out pretty well. Um, Once I have everything kind of sewn down and in place, I think it's going to be very cute. Alright, so we have the body of the jacket pretty much constructed as far as our key point. I have the side seams pinned, which includes the sleeves and the front and back body pieces. And then now I'm going to go ahead and close those. So we're back. This is day 2 of me working on this. And I'm trying it on after I've attached the side seams. Go ahead and sew those shut, but I didn't serge them quite yet. And I like it. There's like one issue that's bothering me with how it looks right now. And it's due to the way that I did the shoulder. Since I did more of a drop shoulder, it's the way that this is kind of pulling up at the neck. If I put my arms down a little bit more, I think you can kind of notice it. So it's like lifting just in this corner over here. And I think I know a way to remedy that. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go ahead and serge the inside, and then I'm going to serge the flap that's raw here. And then I'm going to come back, and then I'm going to repin the way that I would want that to fall. So that way I have like a cleaner look as far as the way this happens. Because when I move, it does that weird thing at the neck up there. And it's like, that's not my favorite. And since I can't do much about the arm because I wanted the fullness, and again, because I'm working out a pattern, I'm going to just keep going with it. Just going to keep having fun with the process, and I'll be back. So I am back. I've did quite a few things off camera because I'm also trying to troubleshoot what it is that could fix this. Where I feel like I've gotten to a good solution so far. So what I did was I went ahead and serged the inside. I pressed this fold down. I pinned the collar in a way in which I feel like it will lay flatter. I went ahead and hemmed the hem of the cape. I still have to serge the cuff of the sleeves and hem those as well. I think we are at a good stopping point for this. I can say I like it. So I'm gonna style it next, and that's gonna be it. I want to thank you all for sticking around to the end of the video, and I hope you enjoyed what you saw. And if you did, please be sure to leave a like and a subscribe, and hopefully I'll catch you next time. See ya!